Good morning. In this video I want to deal with the issue of following Paul and the Pauline doctrines. And there's a view today, and this is really leading to the confusion in the churches and the rejection of dispensational truth. There's movement today to kind of view our Bible as a type of pick and choose and read it any way you want. And every book is can be read in any order. But God has set up a logical order for reading for the New Testament Christian, and that order is laid out in Romans 16, 25, and 26. And it is laid out as the gospel, learning the gospel, Paul's gospel, the mysteries which Paul teaches. Basically, most of the mysteries are in Paul. And then the prophets. There was an order there. Now people might say, well, that's just ridiculous. But the reality is, God is a God of order. And the Old Testament was rearranged from the Hebrew Old Testament in order to set up an order how to read the Old Testament as well. But the fact of the matter is, through Romans, through Philemon, is where the Christian gets his growth. The general epistles complement Paul, and then of course we move into the book of Revelation, which shows the completion of God's plan. And much of the Old Testament then is the fulfillment, showing the ultimate fulfillment of this plan, and there's a lot of practical application of wisdom. But you can't understand any of that unless you understand the Pauline epistles. They must come first. That's where the Christian gets rooted and grounded. And this is not optional. This is not optional to read the Bible this way. God has set out an order to do this. I'm going to read here something from Schofield and his notes here, dealing with the Epistles of Paul. He says here, but to Paul was also committed the unfolding of the doctrines of grace, which was latent in the teachings of Jesus Christ. Paul originates nothing, but unfolds everything concerning the nature and purpose of the law, the ground and means of the believer's justification, sanctification, and glory, the meanings of the death of Christ, and the position, walk, expectation, and service of the Christian. So that's where you find all this, and that's through Paul we understand what the Old Testament is saying and how it relates how it relates to the Christian in this dispensation. Hoffman in his notes states this. The themes of each letter mark the steps of growth for the New Testament Christian. And he finally also about the Epistle of Romans. The Epistle of Romans is the absolute standard for doctrinal truth for one born again child of God, for the Christian. So in other words, the absolute truth that starts in Romans, and then it works through the other epistles. In fact, we get 5 times where we're commanded to follow Paul. 1 Corinthians 4:16, 1 Corinthians 11:1, Philippians 3:17, 1 Thessalonians 1:6, 2 Thessalonians 3:9. There's 5 times in addition to the end of Romans 16, 25, and 26, where we're told how to read our Bible. And so the Christian Bible reading should start with Romans, go through Philemon as your base, your root. And then when you go through Hebrews, through the general epistles, you see how it relates to Paul and how it complements Paul. And then of course you read through Revelation, which completes the plan of God, his second coming, the millennial state, and the eternal state in Revelation 21 and 22. Let me read also here, this is from a work, Explore the Book, by J. Sidel Baxter, and what he writes here. Among a certain class of preachers and theologians today, there is much talk about getting back to the 4 Gospels and the Jesus of history. This in part springs from a serious misconception concerning the unity and progress of Scripture's doctrine as a whole. There's an order to progression of doctrine. Certainly we dare not underrate the foundational importance of the 4 Gospels. They are the historical basis of everything Christian. But if we would know the divine interpretation, the doctrinal meaning, and the wonderful spiritual implications of those basic historical records, we must turn to the epistles. And he puts an emphasis there. Nowadays, among our churches, there is a pathetic deficiency in the grasp of Christian doctrine, and is largely due to this comparative overemphasis on the Gospels at the expense of the epistles. We would say to all Christians, get to know the Christian church epistles well. They are that part of the scriptures with which, in the very nature of the case, we ought to be specially concerned. That is what's written to us as members of the church. That's what we are saved by. We are saved by the gospel of Paul, belief in the blood atonement that Paul preaches in chapters 1 through 4 in Romans, and then we get the fact that we believe in that blood atonement, what he did on the cross. Then, of course, we have to believe in him as a part of our salvation. So both him, believing in him himself, Jesus Christ himself, that he as in his person, and of course also that his work, what he did on the cross. So the two go together. But the reality, so that's our gospel, that's how we're saved. And then, of course, the walk, how we grow in grace, the two natures of the believer, sanctification, the issue of sanctification, we get from Romans 5 through 9, 5 through 8, and of course, that's how we see the growth, we see the progression of our Christian life, and the two natures, and yielding to the Holy Spirit, and the fruits of the Spirit. And then, of course, 9 through 11, Romans 9 through 11 are parenthetical, dealing with Israel and the Gentiles and their future. And then, of course, then you can move into Romans 12 through 16, which are a lot of practical application. And then in the final epistle, the epistles move on into the mystery doctrines in Ephesians, dealing with the church as an organism and a growth. And then Thessalonians, you got the return of Christ and that aspect. But the reality is that the failure to let a Christian understand doctrine is not reading his Bible the way God has set it up to be read. And that is starting with Romans through Philemon as the essential doctrines for us to learn, and then reading the rest of the Bible in lieu of that as part of your understanding and application of growth and understanding the historical basis of the Old Testament. But everything must be understood in light of what Paul tells the believer in this period, in this dispensation. And that means we start with Romans and we go through Philemon and we get rooted and grounded in what Paul says, what he teaches. And only then can we understand the general epistles and the Old Testament as they relate to the Christian. So there is an order to how we're supposed to read our Bible. It is laid out in Romans 16:25 through 26, and that's how we get established in the faith and get rooted and grounded. Paul gets us rooted and grounded. It is Jesus Christ preaching through Paul to the Gentiles that we learn these truths. And so these mysteries were revealed to Paul. The gospel, his gospel, is how we're saved. And then the prophets, we understand those prophets, the Old Testament, by understanding what Paul said in relationship to them. And this is how we avoid being tossed to and fro by every wind of false doctrine, by understanding how Paul teaches us. And you learn that by starting with Romans and going through Philemon and the walk, and understanding the growth and the walk and the gospel as it relates to the Christian today. And then, only then, can you understand the rest of the Bible in relationship, in its relation to the Christian. Amen. Thank you.